I was watching my sister Victoria flip through her phone with practiced indifference. Even here, at our father's will reading, she couldn't be bothered to show respect. Gabriel, she said without looking up, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her phone screen, I hope you're not expecting much. We both know you were Dad's least favorite. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Her words hit like a familiar slap. At 32, I should have been immune to Victoria's casual cruelty, but something about the sterile law office and the weight of our father's recent death made her barb cut deeper than usual. I adjusted my modest blue tie, the only one I owned that wasn't frayed at the edges, and said nothing. Victoria, 3 years older and infinitely more polished, wore a designer black dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her auburn hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and her makeup was flawless despite the tears she'd shed so dramatically at the funeral 2 days ago. Those tears had dried remarkably quickly once the cameras stopped rolling. Victoria, please, whispered our father's younger brother, Uncle Marcus, from across the table. His own grief was written in the deep lines around his eyes, the way his usually immaculate suit hung loose on his suddenly frail frame. Show some respect. She finally looked up from her phone, fixing Marcus with the same dismissive stare she'd perfected in childhood. Respect? Uncle Marcus, let's be honest about what this is. Dad made his feelings about Gabriel crystal clear years ago. Remember the trust fund incident? My stomach clenched. Of course she'd bring that up now, in front of everyone. The trust fund that had been my college money, the one Dad had revoked when I'd chosen social work over business school. The one Victoria had received without question when she'd majored in marketing and minored in finding wealthy boyfriends. That was different, Marcus said quietly, but his eyes avoided mine. Was it? Victoria's laugh was sharp as broken glass. Gabriel's been scraping by for years, working at that little non-profit, living in that sad apartment. Meanwhile, Dad and I had dinner every Sunday. He called me for advice on investments. I was his business partner, not just his daughter. She wasn't wrong. While I'd spent the last decade working with homeless veterans, earning barely enough to cover my bills, Victoria had parlayed her marketing degree into a series of increasingly lucrative positions at companies that seemed to value her last name more than her actual skills. Our father, Marcus Thorne, had built a small empire in commercial real estate, and Victoria had been his obvious heir apparent. The conference room door opened with a soft click, and Miranda Blackwood entered with the measured pace of someone accustomed to delivering life-changing news. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with silver-streaked hair pulled back severely and intelligent gray eyes that seemed to catalog everything in the room. "Good afternoon," she said, settling into her chair at the head of the table and opening a thick manila folder. "Thank you all for being here. I know this is a difficult time." Victoria straightened in her chair, suddenly all business. "Let's get this over with, Miranda. I have a conference call at 4. Miranda's expression didn't change, but I caught a flicker of something, distaste, maybe, in her eyes. "Of course. As you know, your father was very specific about how his estate should be handled. The will is somewhat unusual in its structure." She pulled out several documents, spreading them across the table with deliberate precision. Marcus Thorne was a careful man. Very careful. He spent considerable time ensuring his final wishes would be carried out exactly as he intended. "Meaning?" Victoria's voice had developed an edge of impatience. "Meaning," Miranda said, looking directly at her, "that there are multiple wills." The room went silent except for the distant hum of traffic outside. Victoria's confident posture faltered slightly. "Multiple wills?" Uncle Marcus leaned forward. "I don't understand. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Miranda nodded, pulling out a document stamped with official seals. "The first will, the one your father filed with the court and shared with family, divides the estate as you might expect. Victoria receives the primary residence, the commercial properties, and the bulk of the liquid assets. Gabriel receives a modest sum and some personal items." Victoria's smile was triumphant. "Exactly what I told you, Gabriel. Dad knew who could be trusted with the family legacy." But Miranda wasn't finished. She reached for another document, this one sealed in a separate envelope. However, your father also executed a second will. One that supersedes the first under very specific circumstances. My heart began to pound. Victoria's smile wavered. What circumstances? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Miranda looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. Gabriel, your father left very detailed instructions. He wanted me to read you a letter before we proceed. She opened the sealed envelope and withdrew several pages of familiar handwriting. Dad's script, precise and angular, filled the cream-colored paper. Gabriel, Miranda began reading, if you are hearing this, it means I have passed, and Miranda is following my instructions to the letter. I know your sister believes you were my least favorite child. I allowed her to believe this because it served a purpose. The truth, son, is far more complicated. Victoria's face had gone pale. What the hell is this? Miranda continued reading. Without pause. You chose a path I couldn't publicly support without destroying what I was building for you. Every Sunday dinner with Victoria, every business call, every piece of advice I gave her, it was all theater, Gabriel. I was teaching her to manage what I always intended to be yours. The words hit me like physical blows. Victoria was on her feet now, her chair scraping against the floor. This is insane, she said, her voice rising. Dad would never. Sit down, Victoria. Miranda's voice cut through her protest like a blade. I'm not finished. With obvious reluctance, Victoria sank back into her chair, her hands trembling slightly. Miranda resumed reading. The second will only takes effect if Victoria demonstrates, in the presence of witnesses, the same contempt for you that she has shown throughout her life. If she speaks of you with disrespect during the reading of the first will, if she mocks your choices or diminishes your worth, then everything changes. The room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Victoria's eyes darted between Miranda and me, understanding dawning on her face like a slow-motion car crash. At the beginning of this meeting, Miranda said, setting down the letter and looking directly at Victoria, you stated that Gabriel was your father's least favorite child. You mocked his career choice, his financial situation, and his living arrangements. You did this in front of witnesses, exactly as your father predicted you would. She reached for the second document with ceremony. Therefore, according to the terms of Marcus Thorne's complete estate plan, the second will now takes precedence. Victoria's voice came out as a strangled whisper. What does it say? Miranda's smile was small but unmistakable. It says that Gabriel Thorne inherits everything. The houses, the commercial properties, the investment accounts, the business interests, all of it. Victoria receives the same modest sum that Gabriel was to receive under the first will, $50,000. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria stared at Miranda as if she'd spoken in a foreign language, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. There's more, Miranda said, returning to the letter. Gabriel, I know this must be shocking. But I also know you well enough to predict your next thought, that you'll want to share this inheritance with your sister despite her treatment of you. Don't. This is not about punishment, son. This is about understanding. She paused, letting the words sink in. Victoria has spent her entire adult life believing that wealth and status are her birthright, that kindness is weakness, and that she is entitled to look down on others. The modest inheritance she receives will be enough to start over, if she chooses to. But the bulk of the estate goes to the son who chose compassion over profit, service over success, and humility over arrogance. Victoria found her voice, but it came out as a harsh croak. This can't be legal. Oh, but it is, Miranda said, pulling out additional documents. Your father spent 2 years with our firm crafting this estate plan. Every aspect has been reviewed by multiple attorneys. The psychological evaluation component was particularly innovative, predicting behavior based on established patterns. She looked at Victoria with something approaching pity. He knew exactly what you would say today, Victoria. He wrote down your likely words almost verbatim 2 years ago. Uncle Marcus had been silent through the entire revelation, but now he spoke up, his voice heavy with something I couldn't identify. Marcus always was playing chess while the rest of us were playing checkers. Victoria turned to him desperately. Uncle Marcus, you have to contest this. It's manipulation, it's brilliant, he said quietly. And it's final. Miranda nodded. The estate planning included safeguards against contests. Any attempt to challenge the will results in the forfeiture of even the modest inheritance. I found my voice at last, though it sounded strange to my own ears. How much are we talking about? Miranda consulted her documents. The total estate value is approximately $47 million. The number hung in the air. Like smoke. Victoria made a sound somewhere between a sob and a scream. 47 million, I repeated numbly. The commercial properties alone generate over 2 million annually in rental income, Miranda continued. There are also stock portfolios, municipal bonds, and a stake in several local businesses. Your father was quite successful, Gabriel. More successful than he let anyone know. Victoria was staring at me now with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of rage, disbelief, and something that might have been fear. Gabriel, she said, her voice taking on a pleading tone I'd never heard from her. We're family. Surely there's one final component, Miranda interrupted, pulling out a sealed envelope with my name on it. Gabriel, your father wanted you to have this privately. Perhaps you'd like to read it alone. I took the envelope with hands that seemed to belong to someone else. Through the window, I could see storm clouds gathering over the city, turning the afternoon light gray and ominous. Actually, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice, I think I'll read it here. In front of everyone. Because something told me that whatever my father had written in this final letter would explain not just the inheritance, but the elaborate deception that had shaped our entire family dynamic. And after 32 years of being the disappointment, the afterthought, the least favorite, I wanted Victoria to hear every word. I opened the envelope, my heart pounding, and began to read the words that would change everything I thought I knew about my father, my sister, and myself. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter, my father's familiar handwriting blurring for a moment before coming into sharp focus. The silence in the conference room was suffocating, broken only by Victoria's ragged breathing and the soft rustle of paper. My dearest Gabriel, I began reading aloud, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. If you are reading this in front of the others, then you have made the choice I hoped you would, to face the truth openly, without shame or secrecy. This decision alone tells me I chose correctly. I glanced up to see Victoria gripping the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Uncle Marcus was staring at the table, his face a mask of complicated emotions. I need you to understand, I continued reading, that every slight you endured, every dismissal, every moment you felt unloved, it was the hardest thing I have ever done. But it was necessary for reasons you are only now beginning to comprehend. The words hit me like physical blows. All those years of feeling inadequate, of watching Dad beam with pride at Victoria's achievements while barely acknowledging my own, of believing I was somehow fundamentally flawed, and it had been deliberate. Victoria was always going to be exactly who she became, the letter continued. By the time she was 12, I could see the patterns forming. The casual cruelty to smaller children, the sense of entitlement, the way she manipulated situations to her advantage. I tried to correct it, but every intervention only made her more cunning, more manipulative. Victoria shot to her feet. This is character assassination. Dad loved me. He was proud of me. Sit down, Miranda said sharply. Let Gabriel finish. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. For the first time, I saw past the polished exterior to something raw and desperate underneath. But I kept reading. You, Gabriel, were always different. Even as a small child, you gave away your toys to kids who had less. You defended the children Victoria picked on. When you were 8, you used your birthday money to buy groceries for the homeless man who lived near the park. Do you remember what you told me when I asked why? I did remember. The memory came flooding back with startling clarity, standing in our kitchen, still small enough that the counter came up to my chest, looking up at Dad with complete sincerity. You said, he looked hungry, and I wasn't. That was the moment. I knew, Gabriel. I knew that you understood something fundamental about human worth that Victoria might never grasp. Victoria's laugh was bitter and sharp. So I'm the villain because I didn't give away my lunch money to every sob story? You're the villain, Uncle Marcus said quietly, because you never saw them as people at all. I continued reading, though. My vision was blurring with unshed tears. I made a choice then, one that would pain us both for years to come. I decided to let Victoria believe she was my favorite while secretly preparing you to inherit everything I had built. But I needed to be sure you would use this wealth responsibly, Gabriel. So I tested you. Tested me? I whispered, though I was reading aloud. Every time I denied you money for college, you found scholarships and worked part-time jobs rather than compromise your values. When I refused to help with your student loans, you took on extra shifts at the crisis center instead of abandoning your calling. When Victoria mocked your career choices at family dinners, you never fought back with cruelty, you simply held your ground with quiet dignity. The room had grown so still I could hear my own heartbeat. Even Victoria had stopped moving, frozen in her chair like a deer caught in headlights. Meanwhile, I gave Victoria everything she wanted to see what she would do with it. The trust fund, the job recommendations, the business connections, all of it was a test too. Would she use her advantages to help others? Would she learn humility? Would she develop empathy? I paused, looking directly at Victoria. Her face had gone ashen. The answer, as we all know, was no. Every advantage I gave her only reinforced her belief that she was inherently superior to others. Every success made her more contemptuous of those with less. I watched her fire employees for sport, saw her mock service workers, witnessed her casual dismissal of anyone she deemed beneath her notice. That's not, Victoria started, but her voice died when she met my eyes. We both knew it was true. Gabriel, your sister believes that money makes her better than other people. You understand that money is simply a tool, it can build or destroy, heal or harm, depending on the hands that wield it. That is why it must be yours. I set the letter down for a moment, overwhelmed. $47 million. The number still felt surreal, like something from someone else's life. Miranda cleared her throat gently. There's more, Gabriel. The next section deals with specific instructions. I picked up the letter again, though my hands were shaking noticeably. Now. The inheritance comes with responsibilities, son. First, you will find that I have already established a foundation in your name, the Thorne Family Foundation. It has been quietly operating for 3 years, funded by portions of my estate. Sarah Chen, who has been managing it, will contact you within the week. Sarah Chen. The name was vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. Second, I have purchased the building where your nonprofit operates. The lease will be renegotiated to $1 per year, in perpetuity. Your work with veterans must continue, it is too important to be constrained by financial limitations. My breath caught. The Veterans Support Center where I worked had been struggling with rising rents for years. Just last month, our director had called a meeting to discuss possibly closing our doors. Third, you will discover that I have been anonymously funding several organizations where you volunteer. The literacy program, the homeless shelter, the free clinic, they have all received substantial donations over the years. You inspired those contributions, Gabriel, though you never knew it. The pieces were starting to come together, forming a picture that made my chest tight with emotion. All those years I'd felt like a disappointment. Dad had been secretly supporting the work I cared about most. Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. How long has this been planned? I looked up from the letter to see her staring at Miranda with something approaching horror. The initial estate planning began when Gabriel was 25, Miranda replied matter-of-factly. Your father spent 7 years refining the structure. 7 years. I was 32 now, which meant Dad had started planning this when I first took the job at the Veterans Center. When he'd seemed most disappointed in my career choice. Gabriel, I continued reading, I know you will want to help your sister despite everything. This impulse does you credit, but I urge you to be careful. Victoria has never learned the value of money because she has never lacked it. Perhaps now she will have that opportunity. Victoria made a sound like a wounded animal. Gabriel, please. I'm your sister. We can work something out, let me finish, I said, and something in my voice made her fall silent. However, I will not leave her completely without resources. In addition to the $50,000, Victoria will discover that her apartment lease has been paid for 1 year in advance. I have also arranged for her to receive employment counseling services, should she choose to use them. Victoria's laugh was hysterical. Employment counseling? I have an MBA. Which you've never really used, Uncle Marcus observed quietly. Every job you've had was arranged through your father's connections. The truth of that statement hung in the air like smoke. Victoria's face crumpled as the full weight of her situation began to sink in. I turned back to the letter, nearing the end now. Gabriel, I need you to understand something crucial. This inheritance is not a reward for being my favorite child, it is a responsibility that I believe you are uniquely equipped to handle. You have spent your adult life proving that you can find meaning and purpose without money. Now I am asking you to find meaning and purpose with it. My throat was tight as I read the final paragraph. I love you both, but love alone was not enough to shape the adults you became. Victoria, if you are listening to this, know that it is not too late to become the person you were meant to be. The money was never the point, it was always about character. Gabriel has shown his. Now you have the opportunity to show yours. I folded the letter carefully, my hand steadier now. The silence in the room was complete except for the sound of Victoria crying, not the theatrical tears she'd shed at the funeral, but raw, ugly sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. Miranda reached across the table and placed several documents in front of me. These are the immediate transfer papers, Gabriel. You'll need to sign them today to begin the legal process. I stared at the papers without really seeing them. $47 million. It was more money than I'd ever imagined having, more than I'd ever wanted. But as I looked around the room, at Uncle Marcus's grieving face, at Miranda's professional composure, at Victoria's complete breakdown, I realized that Dad had been right about one thing: this wasn't about the money at all. It was about what we did when faced with power, with opportunity, with the chance to either build something meaningful or destroy it through selfishness. Victoria looked up at me through her tears, mascara streaming down her cheeks. Gabriel, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never meant. Yes, you did, I said quietly, not unkindly. You meant every word, Victoria. Just like you've meant every cruel comment, every dismissive look, every time you've made someone feel small to make yourself feel big. She flinched as if I'd struck her. But Dad was right about something else, I continued, picking up the pen Miranda offered. It's not too late to change. I signed the first document, then the second, my signature looking strange and formal on the legal papers. With each signature, I felt the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders like a heavy coat. What happens now? I asked Miranda. Now you go home and sleep on it, she said with a small smile. Tomorrow, Sarah Chen will call you to discuss the foundation. Next week, you'll meet with the property managers to review your real estate holdings. It will take some time to fully transition everything. Victoria was staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. What are you going to do, Gabriel? With all of it? I thought about the Veterans Center, about the homeless shelter that could barely afford heat in the winter, about the literacy program that turned away students because they couldn't afford more staff. I thought about the letter from Dad and his words about responsibility. I'm going to try to be worthy of it, I said finally. Uncle Marcus stood up slowly, his grief making him look older than his 65 years. Your father would be proud. Gabriel. He knew you'd make the right choice. As we prepared to leave, Victoria caught my arm. Her grip was desperate, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin. Gabriel, please. I know I've been terrible. I know I don't deserve. Victoria, I interrupted gently, you'll be okay. You're smart, you're capable, and for the first time in your life, you'll have to prove it without Dad's connections. Maybe that's exactly what you need. She searched my face as if looking for some sign that I was lying, that this was all an elaborate joke. When she found none, something in her expression shifted. I don't know how to be poor, she whispered. You're not poor, I replied. You have $50,000 and a year of paid rent. That's more than most people start with. The question is, what are you going to do with it? As we walked out of the law office into the gray afternoon, I felt the weight of Dad's letter in my pocket. $47 million and the expectation that I would use it wisely. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely overwhelming, but for the first time in my adult life, I understood something fundamental. I had been my father's favorite all along. Not because I was perfect, but because I had chosen kindness over comfort, service over success, and humanity over status. Now I had to prove I could do the same thing with more money than I'd ever dreamed of. The real test was just beginning. Point 3. Days after the will reading, I was sitting in my cramped studio apartment, staring at a bank statement that seemed like it belonged to someone else. The numbers were real, $47 million had been transferred into accounts I never knew existed, all bearing my name and social security number. My reflection in the black coffee mug showed a man who looked shell-shocked, which was exactly how I felt. The apartment felt smaller now, if that was possible. The single room that served as bedroom, living room, and office suddenly seemed absurd when I could afford to buy the entire building. But moving felt premature, like counting chickens before they hatched, even though the chickens were already laying golden eggs in my bank account. My phone rang, startling me from my contemplation. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. With a local area code. Gabriel Thorne? The voice was crisp, professional, with a slight accent I couldn't place. Speaking. This is Sarah Chen. I believe Miranda Blackwood mentioned I would be calling. Sarah Chen. The foundation manager Dad had mentioned in his letter. I straightened up, suddenly alert. Yes, she did. Though I have to admit, I'm not sure what to expect. A warm laugh came through the phone. That's perfectly understandable. Your father was very specific about timing. I wasn't to contact you until after the will reading, and only after you'd had a few days to process everything. Would you be available to meet this afternoon? I think it would be easier to explain in person. 2 hours later, I stood outside a gleaming office building in downtown, checking the address Sarah had given me twice. The Meridian Tower was one of those glass and steel monuments to success that I'd always walked past without giving much thought. Now, apparently, I had business inside. Sarah Chen met me in the lobby, and she was nothing like what I'd expected. Petite and probably in her early 40s, she wore a simple gray suit and sensible shoes. Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine, and her eyes held the kind of intelligence that made you pay attention. Gabriel, it's wonderful to finally meet you, she said as we walked toward the elevator. Your father spoke about you often. He did. The question slipped out before I could stop it, and I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment. I just didn't think that he talked about you. Sarah's smile was knowing. Oh, he did. Constantly. Every board meeting, every quarterly review, every planning session. Gabriel did this, Gabriel achieved that, Gabriel would handle it this way. It drove some of the board members crazy. The elevator opened onto the 15th floor, revealing a reception area that managed to be both elegant and welcoming. The nameplate on the wall read, Thorne Family Foundation, in simple bronze lettering. Welcome to your foundation, Sarah said, gesturing around the space. Though of course, it's been operating under your name for 3 years now. I followed her down a hallway lined with photographs, children reading, elderly people gardening, families moving into new homes. Each image radiated hope and possibility. These are all programs we've funded. I asked, stopping in front of a photo of a young veteran receiving what looked like house keys. Funded, developed, and in many cases, initiated, Sarah confirmed. Your father believed in comprehensive support, not just writing checks. We identify needs, develop solutions, and provide ongoing assistance. She opened a door to a conference room where 3 other people were waiting. Gabriel, I'd like you to meet the core team. David Martinez, our program director, a man in his 30s with kind eyes and a warm smile, stood up. Mr. Thorne, it's an honor. The Veterans Housing Initiative was inspired by your work at the center. Call me Gabriel, please. And what Veterans Housing Initiative? Sarah exchanged a look with David. That's one of the things we need to discuss. Please, sit down. The next 2 introductions were equally surprising. Lisa Park, the financial director, was a former Wall Street analyst who'd left banking to work in philanthropy. Robert Thompson, and yes, he confirmed with a grin, he was related to the Thompson account that had featured so prominently in Dad's business dealings, was their legal counsel. Gabriel, Sarah began once we were all seated, your father's instructions were very specific. I was to give you the complete picture only after the inheritance was finalized. What I'm about to show you might be overwhelming. She opened a thick binder and turned it toward me. The first page showed an organizational chart that made my head spin. The Thorne Family Foundation wasn't just one entity, it was a network of interconnected programs, investments, and initiatives that touched dozens of communities. We operate on an annual budget of $12 million, Sarah continued. But we're not just giving money away. We're building sustainable solutions. David leaned forward. Take the Veterans Housing Program, for example. Instead of just providing temporary shelter, we've purchased and renovated 17 properties across the state. Veterans can live there while they get back on their feet, then transition to permanent housing with our down payment assistance program. Down payment assistance? I felt like I was discovering a parallel universe where my father had been secretly solving problems I'd only dreamed of addressing. Lisa pulled out another folder. We've helped 43 veterans become homeowners in the past 2 years. The program is completely self-sustaining through rental income from the transitional properties. Robert added, and it's all legal bulletproof. Your father spent years researching the most effective charitable structures. Every program is designed to maximize impact while maintaining financial stability. I stared at the documents, trying to process the scope of what they were describing. This is everything I've ever wanted to do, but on a scale I never imagined possible. That was the point, Sarah said gently. Your father watched you struggle with limited resources, seeing you burn out from trying to help everyone with basically no support. He decided to build the infrastructure you needed, even if you didn't know it existed yet. She turned to another section of the binder. The literacy program you volunteer with? We've funded the expansion to 12 new locations. The homeless shelter? We purchased the building and established an endowment for operational costs. The free clinic? We're funding a new mobile unit and 2 additional staff positions. My vision was starting to blur. All those nights I'd stayed awake worrying about funding cuts, all the times I'd watched good programs fail due to lack of money, all the people we'd had to turn away because we simply didn't have resources, and Dad had been building solutions the entire time. There's more, David said, opening another folder. We've been working on something called the Ripple Effect Initiative. Instead of just addressing symptoms, we identify root causes and develop comprehensive interventions. He showed me a detailed case study. Take the Johnson family, single mother, 3 kids, lost their apartment when she couldn't work due to a medical emergency. Traditional charity would provide temporary assistance and hope for the best. Our approach was different. The documentation showed a systematic intervention that included temporary housing, medical care, job training, childcare, support, and eventually, assistance with a new apartment lease and furniture. 6 months later, Lisa continued, Maria Johnson has a stable job, her kids are thriving in school, and she's saving money for the first time in her life. But here's the key, she's now volunteering as a mentor for other families in similar situations. The ripple effect, I murmured, understanding. Exactly. Help one family properly, and they help others. It's exponential impact instead of just putting band-aids on problems. Sarah pulled out a tablet and showed me a digital map dotted with colored pins. These represent all our current initiatives. Red pins are direct service programs, blue pins are housing projects, green pins are educational initiatives, yellow pins are healthcare programs. The map looked like a constellation of hope spread across 3 states. I counted over 100 pins. How many people are we helping? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Directly? About 15,000 individuals and families annually, Robert replied. But when you count the ripple effects, people who've been helped by people we've helped, the number is probably closer to 50,000. The magnitude of it was staggering. I thought about my work at the Veterans Center, where helping a dozen people in a month felt like a major accomplishment. This was helping thousands, systematically and sustainably. Gabriel, Sarah said, her voice gentle but serious, there's something else you need to understand. Your father didn't just create this foundation because he wanted to do good work. He created it because he was preparing for you to take over his business empire. She opened another section of the binder, this one filled with corporate documents and financial statements. The commercial real estate portfolio, the investment accounts, the business interests, they're not just wealth sitting in banks. They're the engine that funds all of this. She gestured around the room. Every rent payment from a commercial tenant helps fund the Veterans Housing Program. Every dividend from the stock portfolio supports the literacy initiatives. Every profit from the business investments expands our healthcare programs. The complexity of it was breathtaking. Dad hadn't just left me money, he'd left me a machine for doing good, one that generated its own fuel and grew stronger over time. So when people live in our buildings or work for our companies, I said slowly, they're actually contributing to helping others, whether they know it or not. Precisely, David said with a grin. Your father called it virtuous capitalism. Make money by providing value, then use that money to create more value for people who need it most. Lisa opened another folder. We've run the projections. Within 5 years, if the current growth pattern continues, we'll be operating on an annual budget of $20 million while maintaining all existing programs and adding new ones. And that's just the beginning, Robert added. Your father had plans for expansion into education, environmental programs, and small business development. He left detailed blueprints for everything. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the scope of what I'd inherited. It wasn't just money or property, it was a vision of how wealth could be used to create systemic change instead of just temporary relief. What do you need from me? I asked finally. Sarah smiled. For now? Learn. Observe. Ask questions. Your father was very clear that you should take time to understand everything before making major decisions. We've been operating successfully for 3 years, we can continue while you get up to speed. But eventually, you'll be the one setting priorities and approving new initiatives. You'll decide which problems we tackle next and how we tackle them. This is your foundation now, Gabriel. What would you like to do with it? I looked around the room at these 4 people who'd been working in secret to build something extraordinary. They were looking at me with expressions of hope and expectation, waiting to see what kind of leader I would become. For the first time since the reading, I felt something other than shock or overwhelm. I felt excitement. Not about the money itself, but about what the money could accomplish in the right hands. I want to visit every program, I said finally. I want to meet the people we're helping and the people doing the helping. I want to understand how everything works before I start changing anything. That's exactly what your father said you'd want to do, Sarah laughed. We've already started planning a comprehensive tour. It'll take about 2 months to see everything. As the meeting concluded and I prepared to leave, David handed me a small envelope. One more thing from your father. He said to give this to you after the foundation meeting. I opened it to find a single sheet of paper with Dad's handwriting. Gabriel, if you're reading this, then you've seen what 3 years of focused effort can accomplish. Imagine what you can do with 30 years. The world needs people who understand that true wealth isn't about what you can buy, it's about what you can build. Start building, son. The foundation is strong. Dad, as I walked out of the Meridian Tower into the afternoon sunlight, I realized that everything had changed again. The inheritance wasn't just about money or property or even family dynamics. It was about purpose. For the first time in my adult life, I had the resources to match my ambitions. The question now was whether I had the wisdom to use them well. Behind me, the Thorne Family Foundation hummed with quiet activity, 15,000 lives made better by work done in my name. Ahead of me stretched the possibility of 50,000 more, then 100,000, then who knew how many. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely overwhelming. It was also exactly what I'd been preparing for my entire life, even when I didn't know it. 2 weeks into my foundation tour, I was standing in a renovated warehouse that had been transformed into transitional housing for homeless families when my phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. It was the first contact I'd had with her since the will reading. Can we meet? I have something to show you. Coffee shop on 5th and Main, 3 p.m. I stared at the message while Maria Santos, one of our program coordinators, continued explaining how the family pods were designed to provide privacy while maintaining community support. Each unit was small but complete: bedroom, kitchenette, bathroom, with shared common areas for meals and children's activities. Mr. Thorne? Maria's voice brought me back to the present. Would you like to meet some of the families? I pocketed my phone and nodded. The past 2 weeks had been a revelation. Sarah hadn't exaggerated about the scope of Dad's vision. Every program I'd visited had been meticulously planned, expertly managed, and genuinely effective. But more than that, they were staffed by people who truly cared about the work they were doing. Gabriel, please, I said to Maria for the 4th time that day. And yes, I'd love to meet them. The first family I met was the Washingtons. Jerome, a veteran who'd lost his job due to PTSD-related issues, his wife Carmen, and their twin 8-year-old daughters. They'd been living in their car for 3 weeks before finding space in our program. It's not just the housing, Carmen explained as her daughters colored at a small table nearby. It's everything. Jerome's getting counseling, I'm in the job training program, the girls are in the after-school tutoring. It's like someone actually thought about what families need instead of just putting band-aids on problems. Jerome nodded, his hands steady, as he worked on a laptop. I'm 6 weeks into a coding boot camp they're sponsoring. First time in 2 years I felt like I might actually have a future. As I talked with more families, a pattern emerged. Everyone spoke about hope, not just for immediate relief, but for genuine long-term change. The foundation wasn't just helping people survive, it was helping them rebuild their lives from the ground up. By the time I left the warehouse, it was 2:45 p.m. The coffee shop Victoria had suggested was only a few blocks away, giving me just enough time to walk and try to prepare myself for whatever she wanted to discuss. I found her at a corner table, and the change in her appearance shocked me. Gone was the polished professional I'd known all my life. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, she wore jeans and a plain sweater, and her face was free of the heavy makeup she usually favored. She looked younger somehow, but also tired. In a way that went deeper than lack of sleep. Gabriel, she said, standing up as I approached. Thank you for coming. Of course. I sat down across from her, noting the single coffee cup and stack of papers on the table. How are you doing? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Honestly? I'm terrified. And angry. And confused. And about 12 other emotions I can't even name. I waited, letting her find her words. I've been thinking about what you said after the will reading. About it not being too late to change. She gestured at herself. This is me trying to figure out who I am when I'm not Daddy's little princess. She pulled the stack of papers toward her. I've been doing research. About you, about the work you do, about the foundation. Did you know there are news articles about you? That surprised me. News articles? 3 different stories in the past. 2 years about the Veterans Center. All of them mention you by name, quote you talking about the importance of treating veterans with dignity and respect. She slid one of the articles across the table. This one includes a photo. I glanced at the article, remembering the interview. It had been about a successful job placement program we'd developed. In the photo, I was shaking hands with a veteran who'd just landed his first job in 18 months. I never paid attention. Before, Victoria continued. When you talked about your work at family dinners, I just dismissed it. I thought you were wasting your talent on people who couldn't help themselves. Her voice cracked slightly on the last words. But I spent last week reading everything I could find about homelessness, about veteran PTSD, about literacy programs. Do you know what I discovered? I shook my head. I discovered that everything I thought I knew about poor people was wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. She pulled out another paper. This is a study about the causes of homelessness. 60% of homeless families are headed by someone who works full-time but can't afford housing. 40% of homeless adults are veterans. Most people experiencing homelessness are homeless for less than 2 years, they just need help getting back on their feet. She was speaking faster now, as if the words had been building up pressure inside her. I thought people were homeless because they were lazy, or addicted, or just didn't try hard enough. I thought if you worked hard and made good choices, you'd be fine. But that's not true, is it? It's more complicated than that, I said carefully. It's a lot more complicated than that. She pulled out more papers. I've been volunteering at the Literacy Center. Did you know some of our clients are people with master's degrees who just never learned to read properly? Did you know that? Others are immigrants with PhDs who need help with English. I studied my sister's face. The animation in her voice, the passion in her eyes, it was like seeing a completely different person. Victoria, this is wonderful. But what brought this on? She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her coffee cup. I went to apply for a job last week. Marketing coordinator at a mid-sized firm. The salary was decent, not amazing, but decent. I walked in feeling confident. I have experience, I have an MBA, I have references. She paused, seeming to gather herself. The interviewer was a woman about my age. Professional, competent, clearly good at her job. And about 10 minutes into the interview, I realized she was someone I'd gone to college with. Someone I'd looked down on. She came from a working-class family, had to work her way through school, didn't have the advantages I had. Victoria's hands were trembling slightly as she reached for her coffee. She was polite, professional, asked all the right questions. But I could see it in her eyes, she remembered me. She remembered how I'd treated her in college. How I'd acted like she didn't belong because she couldn't afford the right clothes or the right sorority. Did she say anything? No. She didn't have to. At the end of the interview, she thanked me for my time and said they'd be in touch. I knew I wasn't getting the job. Not because I wasn't qualified, but because I'd burned that bridge years ago without even realizing it. Victoria looked up at me, and I saw tears in her eyes. That's when it hit me, Gabriel. All those people I dismissed, all those times I'd been casually cruel to service workers or dismissive of people I thought were beneath me, those people have names, and feelings, and memories. And some of them are probably in positions now where they could help me or hurt me. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I've spent my entire adult life thinking I was better than other people, and now I'm discovering that I'm not better than anyone. I'm just someone who got lucky and never had to learn humility. The vulnerability in her voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard from Victoria. Growing up, she'd been invincible, untouchable, always certain of her place in the world. This broken, searching version of my sister was completely foreign to me. So what are you going to do? I asked. She straightened up slightly, and I caught a glimpse of the determination that had always defined her, but directed towards something entirely different now. I'm going to learn. I'm going to volunteer. I'm going to figure out how to be useful instead of just ornamental. She gestured at the papers. I've already signed up for 3 different volunteer positions. And I'm taking a job. What kind of job? Administrative assistant at the literacy center. It pays $12 an hour. She laughed, but this time there was some humor in it. Do you know how long it's been since I had to think about hourly wages? I did some quick math in my head. $12 an hour, full-time, would be about $25,000 a year before taxes. For someone who'd been living on Dad's generosity and expecting to inherit millions, it had to feel like poverty. How does it feel? I asked. Terrifying, she said immediately. But also, exciting? I've never had to prove myself based on my work instead of my connections. I've never had to budget or worry about money or think about whether I can afford something. She pulled out one more paper, this one covered with her handwriting. I made a list of everyone I can remember being cruel to. Everyone I dismissed or looked down on or treated badly. It's 4 pages long, Gabriel. 4 pages of people I hurt just because I could. I looked at the list, recognizing some names, seeing others that were unfamiliar. What are you going to do with it? I'm going to apologize. To every single person I can find. Not because I want anything from them, but because they deserved better than how I treated them, and they deserved to hear me say that. The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. This wasn't the calculated charm Victoria had always wielded, this was raw honesty. Some of them probably won't forgive me, she continued. Some of them might tell me to go to hell. But I need to try. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her transformation settling between us. Victoria, I said finally, I'm proud of you. She looked up sharply, as if she couldn't believe what she'd heard. You are? Yes. This, I gestured at the papers, at her obvious exhaustion, at the vulnerability she was showing. This takes real courage. It would have been easier to just be bitter about the inheritance, to blame Dad or me or the lawyers. Instead, you're looking at yourself honestly. And trying to change. That's not easy. Tears started flowing down her cheeks again, but she was smiling through them. I have something else to tell you, she said, pulling out a final document. I've been seeing a therapist. Dr. Martinez referred me to someone who specializes in, well, she called it privilege adjustment disorder, but basically it's therapy for people who've had everything handed to them and need to learn how to function in the real world. She slid the document across the table. It was a treatment plan, detailed and comprehensive. I'm learning about empathy, about how my actions affect other people, about why I developed such a sense of entitlement. Turns out, when you grow up, being told you're special just for existing, it really messes with your ability to see other people as fully human. I scanned the treatment plan, impressed by its thoroughness. How long have you been doing this? 2 weeks. I have sessions 3 times a week. It's hard, Gabriel. Really hard. I'm having to confront a lot of ugly truths about myself. She leaned forward, her expression intense. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. I'm just asking you to believe that I'm serious about changing. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw something I'd never seen before. Humility. Genuine remorse. The beginning of wisdom. I believe you, I said, and meant it. We talked for another hour. Victoria told me about her first day at the literacy center, about working with a 70-year-old man who was learning to read so he could help his grandson with homework. She described the shock of realizing that many of the people she was helping were more educated, more experienced, and more capable than she was. They just needed support in one specific area. As we prepared to leave, Victoria gathered her papers carefully. Gabriel, can I ask you something? Of course. When you're ready, not now, but someday, would you consider letting me volunteer with the foundation? Not in any kind of leadership role, just helping however I can. I know I have a lot to prove, but I'd like the chance to try. I thought about the families I'd met that day, about Jerome and Carmen and their daughters, about all the people who were getting second chances because Dad had believed in the power of redemption. Ask me again in 6 months, I said. Show me that this change is real and lasting, and we'll talk. Her smile was brighter than any I'd seen from her since childhood. Thank you, Gabriel. For everything. As I walked back to my car, I thought about transformation, Victoria's, my own, and the hundreds of people the foundation was helping to rebuild their lives. Change was possible, but only when people were ready to do the hard work of examining themselves honestly. For the first time since the will reading, I felt like I was starting to understand what Dad had really been trying to teach us. It wasn't about money or punishment or favoritism. It was about the capacity for growth, and the courage to become better than you were. 6 weeks into my foundation tour, I encountered the first major crisis of my inheritance. I was sitting in Sarah Chen's office reviewing quarterly reports when her phone rang with an urgency that made us both look up sharply. What do you mean the permits were revoked? Sarah's voice was tightly controlled, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. No, don't do anything yet. We'll be there in an hour. She hung up and turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of anger and concern that made my stomach clench. Gabriel, we have a problem. The Riverside Veterans Complex, our flagship housing project, just had all its construction permits pulled by the city. They're saying there were irregularities in the approval process. The Riverside project was supposed to be the crown jewel of our housing initiative, 60 units of permanent supportive housing for veterans, complete with on-site counseling, services and job training facilities. We'd broken ground 3 months ago, and the project was ahead of schedule. What kind of irregularities? I asked, though something in Sarah's tone suggested the answer wasn't going to be simple. The kind that smells suspiciously like political interference. She was already gathering files from her desk. The permits were signed off by the same planning commission that approved them 6 months ago. Nothing's changed about the project, the site, or the regulations. During the drive to Riverside, Sarah filled me in on the details. The project had faced opposition from the beginning, not from the community, which had been largely supportive, but from a group of local business owners who felt that housing for veterans would somehow harm property values. The opposition was led by someone named Richard Blackstone, Sarah explained as we navigated traffic. He owns a chain of mid-level restaurants and has some political connections. Your father dealt with him before, apparently there was bad blood. The name triggered a vague memory. Blackstone, wasn't he involved in some controversy with Dad's commercial properties? More than involved. 3 years ago, Blackstone tried to block one of your father's developments using similar tactics: frivolous permit challenges, neighborhood pressure campaigns, political manipulation. Your father fought back and won, but it cost Blackstone a lucrative contract with the city. We pulled up to the construction site to find it eerily quiet. Where there should have been workers and machinery, there were only empty lots and half-finished foundations. A single security guard sat in a small trailer, looking uncomfortable. Sarah introduced me to Janet Morrison, the project manager, who looked like she hadn't slept in days. It happened overnight, Janet explained, her frustration evident. 1 day we're pouring foundations, the next day we get a cease and desist order from the city. They're claiming the environmental impact study was insufficient, even though it was approved by the same department 6 months ago. I walked through the construction site, seeing months of work and planning reduced to frozen progress. In my mind, I could picture what it was supposed to become: veterans who'd served their country finally having a stable place to call home. How many people were supposed to move in here? I asked. 60 families initially, Janet replied. But the bigger impact is what this does to our reputation. If we can't complete our flagship project, other cities might hesitate to work with us. Back in the trailer, Sarah spread out the legal documents. The cease and desist order was thorough and bureaucratic, full of technical language that essentially boiled down to, stop everything while we rear-review everything. How long could this delay us? I asked. If we fight it through normal channels? 6 months minimum, possibly a year, Sarah said grimly. The legal fees alone would be substantial, and there's no guarantee we'd win. I studied the documents, thinking about the veterans currently on our waiting list. Jerome Washington from the Transitional Housing Program was supposed to move into one of these units in 2 months. His family was counting on it. What would Dad have done? I asked. Sarah and Janet exchanged a look. Your father would have gone to war, Sarah said finally. He didn't back down from fights, especially when he knew he was right. But Gabriel, this isn't just about the project anymore. If Blackstone can shut down Riverside, he can probably target our other initiatives too. The thought of the entire foundation being under attack made my chest tight. In 6 weeks, I'd seen how much good we were doing, how many lives we were changing. The idea of it all being derailed by political games was infuriating. I want to meet with Blackstone, I said. Both women stared at me. Gabriel, Sarah said carefully. That might not be wise. Your father tried negotiating with him once. It didn't go well. I'm not my father. That afternoon, I found myself in the office of Blackstone Hospitality Group, a gleaming corporate space that screamed new money and insecurity. Richard Blackstone was exactly what I'd expected: 50s, perfectly styled gray hair, expensive suit, and a handshake that lasted just a bit too long. Gabriel Thorne, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I have to say, I'm surprised you wanted to meet. Your father never was one for diplomacy. His office was decorated with photos of himself with various politicians and certificates of achievement from business organizations. Everything about the space was designed to impress and intimidate. I'm hoping we can resolve this misunderstanding about the Riverside project, I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. Blackstone's smile widened. Misunderstanding? Mr. Thorne, there's no misunderstanding. The permit process was flawed from the beginning. The city is simply correcting an oversight. An oversight that coincidentally targets a project you've publicly opposed? He leaned back in his chair, studying me with the calculating look of someone trying to determine my weaknesses. Let me be frank with you, Gabriel. Your father and I had our differences, but I respected him. He was a worthy adversary. You, on the other hand. He gestured dismissively. You're new to this game. You don't understand how things work. The condescension in his voice was so familiar it made my teeth clench. It was the same tone Victoria had used for years, the same dismissive attitude I'd encountered from countless people who assumed that kindness meant weakness. Enlighten me, I said evenly. The Riverside neighborhood is experiencing a renaissance. Property values are rising, new businesses are opening, young professionals are moving in. Do you really think a homeless shelter disguised as veteran housing is what the community needs? It's not a homeless shelter. It's permanent supportive housing for veterans who've served their country and need help getting back on their feet. Blackstone waved his hand dismissively. Semantics. The point is, your little charity project doesn't fit the vision for that neighborhood's future. And whose vision is that? Mine, among others. I've invested heavily in that area. I'm planning to open 2 new restaurants there, and I've convinced several other business owners to do the same. We're creating jobs, bringing in tax revenue, revitalizing the community. I thought about Jerome Washington and his daughters, about the other families who needed stable housing. And where are the veterans supposed to live while you're revitalizing their neighborhood? That's not my problem. His voice had turned cold. There are other neighborhoods more suitable for that kind of project. The way he said, that kind of project, made it clear what he really thought about the people we were trying to help. Mr. Blackstone, the permits for our project were properly obtained through legal channels. We've followed every regulation, met every requirement. What you're doing is perfectly legal, he interrupted. I have friends on the planning commission, friends in the mayor's office, friends in the business community. When I express concerns about a project, people listen. The threat was barely veiled. He was telling me exactly how he'd shut down the project and daring me to do something about it. What would it take for you to withdraw your objections? I asked, his smile returned, predatory and satisfied. Now you're talking sense. Here's what I propose: cancel the Riverside project entirely. Use that money to fund something more appropriate for the community, maybe a business development initiative, or infrastructure improvements that benefit everyone. And if I refuse? Then you'll discover that one delayed project is just the beginning. I understand you have initiatives all over the state. It would be a shame if they all started encountering regulatory complications. The threat was explicit now. Comply or watch everything Dad had built be systematically destroyed through bureaucratic warfare. I stood up slowly, my decision crystallizing. Mr. Blackstone, I appreciate your candor. But I think you've misunderstood something fundamental about who I am and what I represent. He raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by what he perceived as posturing from an inexperienced opponent. My father might have fought you because he didn't like being pushed around, I continued. I'm going to fight you because what you're doing is wrong. Those veterans deserve housing, and I'm going to make sure they get it. His amusement faded. You're making a mistake, son. I have more resources and connections than you can imagine. And I have something you don't. Which is? I have the moral high ground, and I have nothing to lose that's more important than doing the right thing. I walked toward the door, then turned back. Oh, and Mr. Blackstone? You mentioned that my father was a worthy adversary. You're about to discover that being underestimated is a considerable tactical advantage. Back in the car, I called Sarah. How did it go? She asked. About as well as expected. He's not going to back down voluntarily. So what's our next move? I thought about Victoria's transformation, about the courage it had taken for her to honestly examine her behavior and commit to change. I thought about the families waiting for housing, about the veterans who'd served their country and deserved better than being pawns in a political game. We're going to fight, I said. But not the way Dad would have. We're going to fight smart. What does that mean? It means we're going to use every legal, ethical tool at our disposal. And it means we're going to make this about more than just one housing project. That evening, I sat in my apartment, which I still hadn't moved out of, despite being able to afford any home in the city, and began planning. But this wasn't just about defeating Richard Blackstone or completing the Riverside project, this was about something much bigger. If I was going to be worthy of the inheritance Dad had left me, if I was going to honor the trust he'd placed in me, then I couldn't just manage his foundation, I had to prove I could protect it and expand it against any threat. The test wasn't just about money or permits or political connections, the test was about whether I had the strength to stand up for what was right. Even when the odds were stacked against me, and for the first time since becoming one of the wealthiest people in the state, I felt like I understood what Dad had really been preparing me for, not just managing wealth, but wielding it responsibly. In a world where people like Blackstone would always try to use power to hurt the vulnerable, the real work was just beginning. 3 months after my confrontation with Blackstone, I stood in the completed community room of the Riverside Veterans Complex, watching 60 veteran families celebrate their move-in day. Children ran between tables laden with food while their parents, men and women who had served their country, finally had keys to permanent homes. The victory hadn't come easily, and it certainly hadn't come the way I'd originally planned. After leaving Blackstone's office that day, I'd made a decision that surprised even Sarah Chen. Instead of hiring expensive lawyers or trying to fight the permit revocation through traditional channels, I'd chosen a different path entirely. We're going public, I had told Sarah and the foundation team during an emergency meeting. Not just with the media, but with the community. If Blackstone wants to play politics, then let's make this political. Within a week, we'd organized the largest community forum in Riverside's history. The venue was the half-finished construction. site itself, with portable speakers and folding chairs arranged among the foundation footings. More than 500 people showed up, but the real breakthrough had come when I'd introduced Jerome Washington to speak. Jerome had stood at the microphone, still wearing his work clothes from the construction job he'd found through our program, and told his story. He spoke about coming home from Afghanistan with PTSD, about losing his job, about living in his car with his wife and daughters. He talked about the shame and the fear, and about how the foundation had given him not just housing, but hope. Mr. Blackstone says this project doesn't fit his vision for the neighborhood, Jerome had said, his voice carrying clearly across the crowd. But I served 3 tours overseas defending this country's values. I earned the right to live in any neighborhood I can afford. And with the foundation's help, I can afford to live here with dignity. The applause had been thunderous, but the real impact came in the weeks that followed. Video of Jerome's speech had gone viral locally, then nationally. The story of a veteran fighting for housing had resonated far beyond Riverside to Blackstone. Had found himself on the defensive, his narrative of neighborhood improvement crumbling under the weight of public scrutiny. When reporters started digging into his financial interests and political connections, several uncomfortable truths had emerged. The permits hadn't been revoked due to legitimate concerns, they'd been pulled as a favor to Blackstone, who had contributed heavily to the campaigns of 3 planning commission members. The environmental impact study that was supposedly insufficient had been prepared by the same firm that had done studies for Blackstone's own restaurant projects, using identical methodology, but the final blow had come from an unexpected source. Victoria.my sister had been working at the Literacy Center for 3 months by then, and she'd become genuinely beloved by both staff and clients. When she learned about the Riverside situation, she'd done something that shocked everyone who knew her. She'd used her old connections not for personal gain, but to help others. Victoria had remembered that one of her former sorority sisters was now an investigative journalist at the state's largest newspaper. She'd reached out and provided background on Blackstone's business practices, including his pattern of using political influence to block developments that might compete with his interests. The resulting exposé had been devastating. Not only had it revealed the corruption behind the permit revocation, but it had shown a pattern of similar behavior spanning several years. Blackstone had been manipulating city processes to benefit his business empire while blocking projects that served the public good. Within 2 weeks of the article's publication, the state attorney general had announced an investigation into municipal corruption in Riverside. The permit revocation had been reversed, and 3 planning commission members had resigned in disgrace. Blackstone himself had avoided criminal charges, but his reputation and political influence were destroyed. 2 of his restaurant projects had been cancelled when his partners distanced themselves from the scandal, and he'd quietly withdrawn from all public opposition to the Veterans Housing Project. Now, watching Jerome's daughters play with other children in what would be their permanent home, I felt something I'd never experienced before: the deep satisfaction of using power responsibly to achieve genuine justice. Mr. Thorne? A voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see Maria Santos, our program coordinator, approaching with a clipboard. The ceremony is about to start. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was simple but profound. Jerome Washington, now serving as the elected president of the Riverside Veterans Complex Residence Council, stood with his family beside the red ribbon stretched across the main entrance. "This building represents more than just housing," he said to the assembled crowd of residents, supporters, and media. "It represents the promise that America makes to its veterans, that when we come home, there will be a place for us here." As Jerome cut the ribbon, I felt a hand slip into mine. Victoria stood beside me, wearing her Literacy Center volunteer t-shirt, tears streaming down her face. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "Dad would be proud of both of us." Over the months since her transformation, Victoria had become someone I genuinely admired. She'd kept her word about changing, working diligently at the Literacy Center while continuing her therapy. Her apology tour to people she'd wronged had been painful but necessary. Some had forgiven her, others hadn't, but she'd approached each conversation with genuine humility. More importantly, she discovered a talent for connecting with people that she'd never known she possessed. At the Literacy Center, she developed a specialized program for helping immigrants with professional backgrounds navigate American workplace culture. Her MBA and business experience, combined with her newfound empathy, had made her uniquely qualified to help people rebuild their careers in a new country. "Have you thought about my request?" she asked as we watched the families exploring their new homes. 2 weeks earlier, Victoria had formally applied to volunteer with the foundation. Not in any kind of leadership role, but as a community outreach coordinator. Her proposal had been thoughtful and well-researched, focusing on building bridges between the foundation's programs and the broader community. "Actually," I said, reaching into my jacket pocket, "I have something for you." I handed her an envelope containing a formal letter. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. "Dear Victoria," she read aloud softly, "the Thorne Family Foundation is pleased to offer you a position as Community Engagement Specialist, effective immediately. Your starting salary will be $45,000 annually, with benefits and opportunities for advancement based on performance." She looked up at me, tears flowing freely now. "Gabriel, I can't accept this. The salary is too much, I haven't earned it." "Actually, you have. Sarah and I reviewed your work at the Literacy Center, your volunteer hours, and your proposal for community outreach. You've shown real skill at building consensus and helping people understand each other. That's exactly what we need." I put my arm around her shoulders. "Besides, it's not charity. We expect you to work hard and prove yourself every day. But we also believe in second chances and the power of redemption." As the celebration continued around us, I thought about the letter Dad had left me, about his words about building rather than just inheriting. The foundation now operated in 7 states, helping more than 25,000 people annually. The Riverside Project had become a model that other cities were eager to replicate, but the real victory wasn't in the numbers or the buildings or even the defeat of Richard Blackstone. The real victory was in the transformation of lives, Jerome's family finding stability and hope, Victoria discovering her capacity for genuine service to others, and my own journey from feeling like a disappointment to understanding my purpose. Sarachan approached us, tablet in hand as always. "Gabriel, I have the final reports from the quarter. Are you ready for the summary?" "Go ahead." Operating budget, $14 million annually. Lives directly impacted, 25,847 individuals and families. Indirect impact through our ripple effect programs, estimated 78,000 people. Return on investment in terms of people moving from assistance to self-sufficiency, 340%. She paused, smiling. "And we have requests from 12 new cities wanting to partner with us on similar projects." I looked out over the riverside. Complex, at families moving into homes they'd never thought they'd be able to afford, at children playing in a safe courtyard, at veterans who'd served their country finally receiving the support they'd earned. "What do you think, Victoria?" I asked my sister. "Ready to help expand this to 12 more cities?" Her smile was radiant. "Ready when you are, boss." As the sun set over Riverside, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I felt Dad's presence as clearly as if he were standing beside me. I understood now what he'd been trying to teach us both, that true wealth wasn't about money in bank accounts or properties owned, but about the positive impact you could have on other people's lives. Victoria had learned that lesson the hard way, through loss and humiliation and the difficult work of genuine self-examination. I had learned it through responsibility and the weight of other people's trust and the satisfaction of turning resources into real change, but we'd both learned it, and that was what mattered. The inheritance had never really been about money at all. It had been about character, about growth, about becoming the kind of people who could be trusted with power and resources and the opportunity to make a difference. 6 months after the will reading that had changed everything, I finally understood what Dad had known all along. The greatest inheritance isn't what you receive, but what you do with it after it's yours, and we were just getting started. Jerome Washington's youngest daughter ran up to me, tugging on my jacket. "Mr. Gabriel, come see our new room. Mama says we can paint it any color we want." I let her pull me toward the building, Victoria laughing as she followed behind us. Inside, families were exploring their new homes, planning their futures, beginning the next chapters of their lives with hope instead of desperation. This was what $47 million looked like when it was used right, not luxury cars or mansions or status symbols, but children who had bedrooms of their own, veterans who had stable housing, families who had been given the chance to rebuild their lives with dignity. As I walked through the halls of the Riverside Veterans Complex, Surrounded by the laughter of children and the conversations of adults planning their tomorrows, I realized that Dad had been right about everything. I had been his favorite all along, not because I was perfect, but because I had the capacity to care about others more than myself, and now, finally, I had the resources to match that caring with real action. The story of the inheritance was over, the story of what we'd build with it was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.